Hi everyone, welcome back to Redefine the Circle. I'm Ashley Sunshine, co-owner and head of pitching development here at OGX. I am welcomed today for the first time by our very own Josh Hayes. Josh, welcome to Redefine the Circle.
Thank you.
Did you, I don't know, did you ever think, we'll get into obviously your story, your background a little bit, but you're relatively new to OGX.
Yes.
And maybe there was a time where you watched Redefine the Circle. Now you're on it. Big move. This is cool.
Yeah, it's kind of actually a bit of a surreal experience. I've been watching it for a couple years now.
Yeah.
And following OGX, and so it's weird to be on this side of the microphone.
Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're a part of our team. Obviously, you and I work together very closely on a daily basis. But I'm glad to have you on Redefine the Circle as well. Okay, so let's start maybe by giving a short intro. The whole point of our episode today is not just about your story. So we'll keep it brief because obviously I think it's an interesting story of how you found your way onto our OGX team as a pitching coach. But let's just give the audience a little brief intro so that they kind of have an idea of like what your background is and why what we are going to talk about, which today is centered around youth pitching, why I really thought you would be a great guest, if you will, to have on Redefine a Circle. So you started with us over the summer. Mm-hmm. We did an internship for a variety of coaches, but came on as a pitching intern. And then we just knew right away it was such a great match, and you've been with us full time since September. So can you first start by telling us like a little bit about how that started, what brought you even to a point where you wanted the internship, how you knew, when you knew that like, hey, if this is full time, this is for me. Maybe just give us a little bit of a summary on what that has looked like.
Well, several years ago, my daughter, Jalise, who's 16 years old, she was doing some training when we were formerly S2.
Yeah.
Since then, I've always been keeping up to date on what you guys were up to, what you were starting to get into with the college assessments, and how you were starting to do a bit of a different training model.
Yeah.
And that really piqued my interest. So in October of last year now, my daughter started training here full time.
Yeah.
So I'm a pitching dad, been on the bucket since she's been about 10 years old.
Yeah.
So she started training here and just following the sessions, her programming, all the things that just continued to interest me. I started to see her grow from sitting in the corner as a dad, watching her on the pitching floor. And then come spring, the Bet on Me coaching position became available.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a perfect opportunity to grow more as a coach because we all could grow more. I made my mistakes in coaching, and I just wanted to learn more. I wanted to be around people that have done it. And done it at a high level, so that I can learn from that.
I'm going to interject really quickly because what I would say is that, the way we see all coaches, the way I even see myself is that we all started in a very traditional, on a traditional path because that's all that existed, right? And so anytime I'm in a conversation with a parent or a coach in your situation, it was a hybrid. You were a coach at a team level, you were a coach, I kind of think any pitching mom or dad who's in the trenches is a coach, whether they have the formal title of coach or not, because you really are like the extension of your daughter's pitching coach. So, but every once in a while, let me back up. I always expect that those conversations are going to be rooted in, kind of helping them sort through their traditional train of thought. And have some questions that are like, well, what about this? Or what about this? Well, do you teach this? And so none of that ever takes me aback. I'm always like, we're all on this journey. I was on the same journey and in a very traditional path, not, just a handful of years ago. So, but then every once in a while you have a conversation with someone it surprises you in the other direction. Like they're a little bit more in the future than what you anticipated. Mm-hmm. And I think even before we posted about an internship, you would say, hey, do you mind if we just have some conversations? Because your daughter trained here in person and we're really kind of like a non-parent type of training culture, you were off to the side of it. You would approach me and say, hey, can we just have some conversation about the data? I'm just super interested. I want to learn. I want to grow. I want to make sure not just for my own daughter, but for my coaching brain. And then you and I started having conversation with that and about those types of concepts. And I could tell right away, like these weren't average conversations. I have a lot of conversations from parents to private pitching coach to coaches at the college level. And I could tell like, this is different. You have a different kind of brain, which I kind of like sparked my interest from that standpoint. So I just wanted to kind of weigh in on what it was like from my experience to know that, like, yes, on paper you were a dad and a travel ball dad, but me kind of getting to know you as a dad of one of our athletes, I could tell, like, I think your brain fits here. That's really what it was like from my experience. So, okay, so take us now. We went through the internship, which was really about initial exposure to who we are, what we do, the whys, the systems, how to, individualize things, but based off of a solid system, which is complicated, right? And then were there ever any doubts to you that you would go into this full time if we gave you that opportunity? How did you know, like, this is right for me?
I don't think I ever had any doubts. I think that's what I really wanted, is to go into this full time because I'm super passionate about it. I want to learn. And like you said, my brain has always kind of functioned in this. I was formerly a fireman, paramedic, so I was very interested in how the body moves and how the body operates and development. So it just really matched up with who I am. And, since my daughter my oldest was 10 years old, she had a lot of good traditional instructors along the way and took bits and pieces from them. But I always had a certain level of just being unsettled with some of the methods and how those things were they really affecting her. I know she was growing and getting bigger and stronger, but when she got to the point where after her first menstrual cycle, 2 years after that, she started to plateau a bit, and then that's where even more questions came in about, like, how do we really approach this? And it's like, there's so much data and so much information through what you guys do. It started to really open my eyes to things, and I was like, I'm not going crazy. Like, we can do things differently.
Yeah. Well, I think you've been obviously, I'm not just saying this on the podcast. This is something that I obviously tell you on a regular basis, but you've been a fantastic addition to our team. And what I mean by your brain works differently, I picked up very quickly, and I continue to see more and more. You question, which some people don't do. A lot of people don't do. But then a lot of people do question things. But beyond that, you're a problem solver, right? You like to think, okay, I am identifying that things are not quite right, but I like to then be on the journey to solve them. And I think that's really what I mean by, like, your brain fits here. So, okay, we'll stop at that. We could obviously go into much deeper layers of what brought you to this and how you left one career and came over to here. But for the sake of the audience and today's episode, that's how you became a part of the OGX team. Okay, so the reason why I thought you would be a great guest is because I wanted to talk about youth pitching, particularly these ages of, give or take 10U, which can be, I guess, 8-year-olds. That's like crazy for me to say, but I guess that 8, 9 as the youngest, all the way up to like 12-ish, right? There's like 10U, 12U. Because we don't talk a lot about that specific age, and there's a reason for that. The clear-cut explanation is that what we do, our actual product here at OGX, isn't for those athletes. It's not because we don't, value them. It's not because we don't think like they're worth our time. It's nothing like that. It's simply because when we first started on this journey of collecting data from a biomechanics standpoint, from a ball flight standpoint, we did not think that we had any limitations to age. We were like, you're 10, you're 11, yep, let's get you hooked up and let's get in our little lab and let's figure this out. And it became very clear to us within the first year, it didn't even take a year, that all of these athletes, really before they hit puberty, and even about 12 to 18 months after that, everything was the same. Now, there were certain things, not like they were the same exact person and individual, but they were our lowest level of stability. And obviously, their bodies are just continuously changing. So as far as what we were measuring, they were the lowest level of stability, which meant posture broke, rotation was poor. What we quickly learned is that some athletes might have better power. That was innate. That was genetic, right? Which is still the case at any age. So that's why some athletes threw harder. But there was really no sense of variability. And what we now know variability is about getting the ball, whether it's, change of speed, having a real feel for that, tunneling pitches, changing spin direction, being able to manipulate hand position to create like this pitch design concept that obviously we're involved in on a regular basis. This was above, their stability was too low to be able to do that. So these young pitchers were measure my curve, my drop, my rise, my screw, my et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they were just angling different pitches. There was no art form at that age. And then we obviously went down the path of like, why not? And this is what led us to this. Well, they're not ready for that, right? So we now know it's not appropriate for us to take our, let's measure where you are. We say 13, sometimes depending on where an athlete is developmentally, we make some exceptions to that, right? It's like, well, she was, had her first period when she was 11 or 10. Then we kind of see where case by case, if it's appropriate for them to get in and start at a baseline. But even here, we handle, which I'll get into, this sort of 12, 13 to 14 age a little different. Their training sessions typically don't, and their programming doesn't really look like our typical 15, 16 to 22-year-old. So, okay, so I want to preface with that. That is why we don't really, we don't say like, we're not the people for the 10 to 12-year-olds, right? It doesn't mean we don't have a lot of information about them. It's just that we've realized we coach pitching like we should attack a 10-year-old like we do an 18-year-old. It is way too complicated of a movement. It requires so much stability that age group just does not have.
Right.
It's not overhand throwing. It's not a fundamental skill. Let me be clear about that. It is not overhand throwing. It is not a fundamental skill. This is not something you just go in the backyard and they can just tap into and unravel their arm action appropriately. They're not going to do it. So, all right, so we've been a little more hands-off on that age group, right? And so we've noticed some problems with that. But before I go into what we have kind of identified as a little bit of an issue with us being totally hands-off with that age group, can you weigh in as a coach? You've coached those age groups, right? I've never have. So you've coached those young age groups, and you're a dad, right? So you're a dad of young girls, 3 young girls, to be exact, and some of those daughters which have gone through already those age groups. Tell us a little bit what it's like, what this feels like as far as trying to keep up. Do you feel pressure? Do you feel as if like, oh, we've got plenty of time? What goes through the head, the mind of a dad and a coach of a pitcher who's at this 10U, 12U level?
Well, thinking back to when my oldest was at that age, 10 to 12U, I think the word I would use to describe that would be frustrated. So we would go to lessons, learn concepts, and then come home and spend hours in the garage trying to force her into different positions, and she wasn't doing it. And I'm like, why can't you do this? And buying all the latest contraptions and modifying her shoes to try and get her to drag laces down. And so those, I think frustrated was the biggest thing. And then also, I don't think, I've always seen the big picture of things, but other coaches, other parents that I've been around, their expectations for that young age group are just too much. Their little bodies just can't do certain things. So in seeing that, and related to OGX, I wanted to find a way, like I know even being here, it's like we don't serve that level of athlete, 9 to 12 years old, 10 to 12 years old, but we have the education pieces that we can use to educate that group so that they don't come to us when we're their last hope, where they're injured, where they're overworked. And so like putting that education piece in them, I was like, I think we do have something to offer them in the way of education.
Yeah. So this is the problem we've identified, right? That we're like, okay, we're not for, our product is too, it's not that it's elite, because we have athletes that come to us from all, some of them are like, I just want to get better. And when what that stage they're looking to really launch themselves into, it varies. I mean, it's not like we only take athletes who want to play in the Power 5. Like that's not how we operate at all. So it's not about the product being elite, but it's complicated. It's complex. It requires maturity, not just mental, emotional maturity, physical maturity. That is not a match. So I think you're right. There's a disconnect. What the position demands, is those things. It's physical maturity. It's the ability to stabilize. And what really the issue is that we haven't understood the motion, right? We just relate it to hitting. We relate it to overhand throwing. It's much different. It's much more complicated from a physical standpoint. And then we take these bodies that aren't mature enough. So, this is probably like an unpopular opinion, but I'd say like, no one can pitch in games until they're, at a certain point. And obviously that's ridiculous.
And that's where I'm sorry to interrupt. That's where I'm at with my 9-year-old is like, she enjoys softball. She loves pitching. She's kind of an early bloomer.
Yeah.
Tall kid, throws kind of hard, but it's like, I'm kind of nervous about entering her into this current system of pitching. It's like, how does this even look for her? Is she going to get injured? Like it's
right. You can't bring her here.
Now that you know all the things, it's like, what am I going to do with her? But she's starting to fall into that 9 to 12 and 10 to 12, which we're getting into. So I'm super excited about that.
Yeah. So we have athletes who are essentially like, okay, you work here, and your daughter's like, well, I can't bring her to OGX. We don't do that. But then also, if you wait, the game has passed you. The position may have passed you if you wait till you're 13 to get involved. So we're getting these phone calls. People are calling us, are talking to our sales department and saying, what do I do? I'm following this. I love the podcast. I get the concept. I understand that what's happening at these young ages is they're just following the traditional route. They think they have a billion pitches of different pitch types, spin directions, et cetera, and they don't. And so now what we thought we had, we don't. We now are teaching the motion as if it's like a series of positions, which it's not. And so what that leads to are that athletes they kind of get stuck in bad patterns. And then they're like, okay, well, I finally get to you and I'm 13, 14, but now your work is to undo things that are not great about her motion.
Right.
And like, that's not the route we want to go down. So like, how can you guide us on what to do until we're ready for our training to get a little bit more mature? And so we were like, that's a good question. We really don't have an answer to that. And as you know, at OGX, we don't like not to have answers. So we're like, okay, let's think about this. We know how to approach that age group. It's just that, I wish there was a large community out there. And I think we are working a little bit more closely now with private instructors across the country, with more travel organizations to get these messages out, not just about workload, but about what that age level is really about, is preserving movement variability, making sure that you don't stick them in a box. You're trying to teach them to manipulate everything with their wrist, that you understand the motion is so much more complicated than that. We want them to become good movers. We want their brain to register where their arm is in space. They need constant feedback because their bodies are just constantly changing week by week, month by month, certainly year by year, until they stabilize about 12, to up to 24 months, probably after their first period. So we need to keep them in an environment that's about understanding where their body is in space, very task oriented. It's very constraint led, right? So we used to kind of host a little bit of, we called it next gen, and it was, you could come on a regular basis, and it just didn't seem like it was the right fit because there wasn't enough education. Like basically we had people coming, we would have them throwing plyos. It was task oriented. We would give them slightly different weights, making sure it was appropriate for what they could handle. We would give them competition. We would give them an environment where we were like, this is really what they need. But there wasn't enough education to the parents about like why it looks so different than a pitching lesson. So what we really found was that those same athletes who were coming to us for really what I felt like was an appropriate training environment for pitching at their age, then they were still seeking pitching coaches to learn a curve, to learn a rise, to learn a drop. And we're like, this isn't what we're going for, right? What we want is education. And so we kind of swung the other way with, let's just educate of why we don't work with that group. And now we're kind of finding ourselves in the middle, right? So we're like, we do want to be able to offer them something, but it has to look different. It has to really model what we believe in, which is education, which is program-based, not single camp with a set of drills, not lesson-based, so we have had these conversations, you and I have. You have a particular interest and passion for this young group because it has been led astray, right? That they're still like crying out for some help and guidance. So talk a little bit about what we have come up with regarding what we think a really great approach would be for athletes of this age, how it really fits what we believe in at OGX and how we can be involved in that.
Yeah, I just think we have such great systems in place that have been developed over years, systems of education, systems of training, systems of communication. So in order to get education to parents, and I'll say this, once we can educate these parents and educate these players, I think starting at the base, and I know we've changed the game a lot from the high school level up, but if we really start at the beginning and start to educate these parents and players, they can educate their coaches, and that really starts to change the culture at the younger levels, and then hopefully as they come up, they keep that. But what we have in mind to reach out to this age level of athlete and family is open communication, and through that communication, bi-monthly communication with parents, doing Zooms with them, with our pitching staff here, and then starting to introduce the little ones to different types of movements, helping them understand what plyos are. I think low intensity is highly underrated across the board with traditional pitching approaches. And I think low intensity in plyos is perfect for this age group. It starts to instill in them good patterns. And like you said, once they get to 13 or 14, it's not because of a problem. It's like we can hit the ground running at that age. Instead of trying to get them healthy or back from injury, we can go right at different concepts. They've learned that trunk stability is important, and we can get going with increasing variability through plyos, through low intensity. Eventually, they'll be able to hit different locations better. They'll eventually be able to put different spins on the ball and variability in that way. So it's really exciting to make contact with this group again.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be huge in terms of changing the game as a whole.
Yeah.
And then also just keeping kids healthy.
Yeah.
It's like a particular instance, I saw a pitcher get pitched 300 pitches in one game. Or sorry, not in one game, in one afternoon.
I was going to say, I'm rarely surprised, but that probably would have surprised me. Okay.
Maybe in a practice,
Right.
it's gotten that high from what I've seen. But,
Yeah.
300 pitches in a day, and like just by education, those
Yeah.
are types of things that we can prevent injuries with.
Yeah.
And then also the other education piece is that for me as a parent, it would give me, if I had known what I know now, a definite peace of mind that there's no rush, that this is a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
I tell parents that even a couple years ago, telling parents like, you want to see your player healthy, happy, and get to their goals. This is a marathon. We don't need to rush now.
Yeah.
We have some coaches with our organization who trains here. It's like short-term losses for long-term wins. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big part of this.
Yeah.
Let's take a step back, slow down,
Yeah.
and get the education, and then you can kind of relax and
Yeah.
you can enjoy the process more. I think that's the biggest thing. If I could go back, I would love to enjoy the process more. And this education is going to
Yeah.
help me do that, help other parents do that, and help the players do it.
Yeah, I agree. So we're talking about education. We're talking about things like workload management, the concept of the trunk and arm relationship, what variability actually looks like, and we're going to program. So in this, we're calling it Next Gen. It's kind of like Next Gen 2.0, essentially, right? It's going to be an 8-week program. We are going to write 3 days a week a program for these pitchers of this age group that is, it's not just low intensity, right? They're also going to throw it high intensity because we know, obviously, a pitcher, her soul is competitive. She wants to get up there and throw as hard as she can, right? She wants to compete, those types of things. So, but it's going to be a lot of low to moderate intensity based work, even though they will tap into high intensity. A lot of plyos. We'll educate on why. We'll talk about essentially what we're trying to build up to. And so what we're really launching is this opportunity for athletes in this young group to train with a program. We don't believe in a single camp, a single drill, a single lesson, but a program that you follow week to week. Right now, we're starting off with just 8 weeks, right? So it'll be through February and March to initially. And you could follow it remotely. If you live nearby, we'll have opportunities for you to come and participate or actually train some of those, those sessions in-house here at our OGX facility. But every week there'll be an opportunity for an OGX coach to talk to parents, a part of that program, and even the athletes on why the program's written the way it is, what we're trying to accomplish, how it's connected to the week before it or after it. And then in addition to that, to really have these education system, this communication back and forth, these live webinars, maybe even with our full OGX staff, pitching staff, about larger concepts, like I said, workload, variability, stability, to understand this concept of how what we're doing now is to preserve what they're doing when they're young, so that when they get to this age where their bodies start stabilizing, now they're at ground zero and they can take off, right? I think what's so important is that when I sit down sometimes with families of 13, 14-year-olds, they're like, we feel like we're behind. I'm like, in my mind, you're just starting. This is ground zero. So we don't want to get to ground zero with pain in our story, with stress fractures. The L4 and L5 stress fracture situation with 13-year-olds, to me, across the country is alarming, right? So we don't want to have things like that because workload's out of control. We don't want to have things like, well, she has 6 different pitches, but none of them actually differentiate themselves from one another. We want to be able to help athletes understand this is the way that training, both from a strength and conditioning standpoint, a warm-up standpoint, an actual pitching training standpoint, what that looks like. Let us guide you. Let us educate you so that you can continue to build up and get to a point, as you said, you can hit the ground running instead of feeling like now we have to try to undo. And undoing is hard. It's hard at every single level. And so I'm excited about this as well. As you know, I obviously typically tend to work with athletes who are a little bit older. But I love the spirit of young. I love an energetic, like a little bit wild, untamed spirit. And little kids tend to have that type of spirit. And so I think this is just such a great opportunity for us, like I said, to not only guide them, but to educate along the way. So I'm looking forward to this kicking off for sure.
Yeah, and I just think I want to highlight one more point is the communication part. I think we do a great job with our older athletes. We have channels where we can all communicate together, and they have access to us.
Yeah.
And I think access to your coaches, to your trainers, is something that's lacking overall in the typical lesson world. You go to a lesson one week, and you really can't communicate with that instructor. Now, some instructors, they do have that, I'm sure. But you go away for a week or two, and then back at your next lesson is a time to ask questions and to get back at it. But with this program, we're kind of right there. We're communicating weekly. We're going to do the video chats a couple times a month. And for me, that would have been awesome. And it's such a relief to be able to reach out and say, hey, we're struggling with this, instead of having to wait till that next lesson. So I think the communication part is great, especially for the parents.
Yeah, and basically I'm paying for an hour, but I have 15 minutes of questions, right? So we're building more of a network, a community where there's designated times that aren't cutting into a paid training session where you can have these questions answered. So again, I am excited for it. I think it's much needed in our game for this age group. And I think it's a great way for us to take what we do on a regular basis here at OGX to make it more age and developmentally appropriate, but to still deliver a great product. So be on the lookout, obviously, for those of you who are listening to this podcast, you're interested for your daughter, for some of your athletes, be on the lookout for some of the logistics and how to get registered for this. Again, it's not just for our pitchers in our local community here. It is designed to really work, as all of our programs are here at OGX, for athletes who live anywhere in the country. So there will be opportunities if some of the athletes live closer to be in person, but it is designed to really be for any pitcher within this age group, this 10U, 12U. So again, look out for those details. We are excited to connect with parents and coaches and athletes who are going to be signing up for this program. I think it's going to be great. All right, Josh, that was it. See? Easy. All right. Easy to go through this little podcast, but it was really a joy to have you today. I'm excited for what you have to offer to these young athletes. I think, once again, we have really built something that I feel comfortable with. We never like to launch a product or launch something that it just in my soul is like, I don't think we have this quite right. And I'm feeling like we've got it. It's taken us a few tries and attempts, but I do feel like this is a great approach for this. So thank you again for being here today. And thank you to all of you once again for listening to this episode. Looking forward to bringing you the next episode of Redefine the Circle. Between now and then, remember, keep questing on to redefine the circle. Thanks, everyone.